mechanism of TDS was being enlarged, not just to collect taxes, but also to track transactions that are otherwise not being subject to examination by the tax authorities. And therefore, in the recent past, we have been seeing provisions of TDS which have no correlation to income being earned by the assessee. For example, TDS on cash withdrawal is one such example where the cash withdrawn can at no stretch of imagination be regarded as income of the person withdrawing the classes. If someone asks that TDS is generally understood to be a tax on income, cash withdrawal is not an income per se, and therefore is section 194N, which provides for TDS by banks on withdrawal of cash of more than 1 crore, a valid, constitutionally valid provision? The answer would be yes, because the historical concept of TDS being a mechanism of collection of tax in advance is no more valid. Today, TDS is equally a mechanism for ensuring non-evasion of taxes. Power to enact law under Constitution for collection of taxes will include power to enact law so as to ensure tax is not evaded. So provisions like section 194N, which provides for collection of taxes on withdrawal of cash, that is an item which does not represent income in the hands of the recipient of money, be upheld constitutionally even if challenged on the ground that are anti-evasive provision and need not necessarily have an element of income in the hands of the recipient. This point is important, not just for the purpose of challenging any of the provisions of the Act, but also for determining the quantum of the tax that can be collected on such transactions. Today, we feel that the TDS and TCS, which is introduced on goods, is too small an amount, 0.1%. Over the years, all of you would agree with me, this 0.1% will slowly increase to 0.5%, thereafter to 1%, and thereafter to 5%. And then a classification will be made between goods that have high resale value, high profit margin, resale. All these complications are going to come, if not in the next 2 years, after 10 years' time. You must bear in mind that TDS is not only a provision for collection of taxes in advance, but also a provision for ensuring the tax is not evaded. Today, the entire scheme of TDS on goods will be looked into as a provision which is used for ensuring there is no evasion of taxes, but over a period of time, it can change its colors. Having said that, how does the section stand today? Before going into the TDS provisions, which are to come into application next week, let us have a glimpse of the provision that was introduced by the Finance Act 2020, which has already come into effect from 1st of October 2020. The provisions relating to tax collection at source was introduced by the government a decade or so back on specified products like alcoholic liquor or parking lots owned by or sale of forest products. And the object behind introduction of these sections was that these people who purchase a forest product or who purchase alcoholic liquor do not maintain proper books of accounts, and the income tax department is not able to assess them. And therefore, simultaneously, section 206C and section 44AC, which provided for a gross basis of taxation of such assessees, was introduced. As you all know, the provision was challenged before the Andhra Pradesh High Court first and then in the Supreme Court in the well-known case of Sanyasi Rao. There, the assessee challenged that tax deduction at source, which is historically known in the income tax legislation, is applicable only when money is received. That is, when money is received by a person, there is an element of income in it. Therefore, there is some validity in saying that tax has to be deducted on that income. Now, the government has introduced tax collection at source, which is like an expenditure tax on the money that I expend to purchase my forest produce. You are collecting tax at source. On purchases, there can be no income. Therefore, the provisions relating to collection of tax at source is unconstitutional, was the argument of the assessee. And the assessee succeeded before some high courts, lost before the high courts, a few high courts. When the matter ultimately came to the Supreme Court, the constitutional validity of the section was upheld for two reasons. One, the reason I gave you a few minutes back, that the power to enact legislation, not only a power to enact legislation on taxation generally, it will also include power to enact regulation to ensure there is no evasion of taxes. TCS is a provision to ensure that anti-abuse provision to ensure there is no evasion of taxes. That is number one. The more interesting judgment of the Supreme Court was, interesting reasoning given by the Supreme Court was, it is true that income is finally earned when goods are sold. But even when you purchase raw material for your goods, there is a small element of profit embedded in it. Therefore, the government has all the powers to enact a provision to collect taxes on purchases also. Going by that reasoning, today, if anyone wants to say that TDS on goods is unconstitutional, it would be an impossible allegation or impossible ground to take before the Supreme Court. I'm saying this because few of my professional colleagues had put this question to us, clients also. In this background, the provisions relating to tax collection at source on all goods sold by a person was introduced by the Finance Act 2020. The section is applicable where the turnover of the immediately preceding financial year is more than 10 crores, and then where there is sale of goods is more than 50 lakh rupees. For example, Reliance Industries has a turnover of more than 10 crores in the previous year. It supplies, say for example, chemicals for manufacturing. It supplies rayon for manufacturing certain textile products to JK Synthetics. Reliance Industries, when making a sale of 1 crore, in addition to sale price of 1 crore, should collect 0.1% of TCS from JK Synthetics, is what is the provision as introduced in this section. The section as introduced also said that it would not apply to transactions which is already subject matter of TDS, and tax has actually been deducted at source. There are twin conditions which are prescribed for non-applicability of the section. There must be a liability to deduct tax on the transaction, and that tax should also be deducted on that. There are some practical difficulties that we will face today because of this. We will see it in a few minutes. And then another exemption was granted for import of goods. This is mostly to provide exemption to people who are exporters sitting outside India. When someone from US has to export goods to India, literally leading, the provisions relating to TCS can apply on him also. There might be an obligation on, say, Microsoft US, which sells goods to the consumer in India, to collect TCS. That section is not intended to catch hold of such transaction. Therefore, an exemption was given to goods which are imported into India. That is something which is turning around this also. We'll look at it in a few minutes. Having tasted success on applicability of TCS for around 6 months' time, and as there was no significant opposition that was raised by the parties who are entering into such transaction, the provisions relating to deduction of tax at source was introduced by the Finance Act 2021. Largely, the provisions relating to TDS is a mirror image of provisions into TCS. The TDS provisions will also apply on any person who has a turnover of more than 10 crores and he purchases one goods. TCS would apply if a person having turnover of 10 crores sells a goods. TDS will apply if person having turnover of more than 10 crores purchases any products. And it will apply if the purchase value is more than 50 lakh rupees in a year from a party. The section here will not apply if at the time, if the section would apply at the time of credit of the consideration for the sale of goods into the account of the seller, or whenever the payment is made, whichever is earlier. This scheme is similar to the any other TDS provisions. The section shall not apply if tax is deductible under other provisions. For example, if on a transaction TDS is to be deducted under 194C or 194J, then the provision will not apply. Or when the tax is collectible under provisions other than section 206C1H. Like for example, if there is a transaction of purchase of liquor, where tax is collectible under 206C1, then the provisions relating to TDS would not apply. And this is to come into effect from next week. Slightly diverging from here, the other important provisions that we have to keep in mind when putting in place a system for collecting or deducting tax at source is the provisions relating to your linking of PAN with Aadhaar and the provisions relating to non-filing of return. Before we look at the obligation to link PAN with Aadhaar, we also have to understand as to where is the requirement of obtaining Aadhaar and the requirement of linking Aadhaar with PAN is flowing from. All of us know section 139A1 provides that every person who has taxable income should obtain a PAN. Now, other categories, broadly, any person who has any taxable income should obtain a PAN. 139A5C, read with rules framed under therein, that is rule 114B, says, in any transaction where the value is more than 2 lakh rupees, PAN of the parties entering into the transaction is to be disclosed. For example, if Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan as a firm is raising an invoice on a client of more than 2 lakh rupees, the invoice should contain the PAN of Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan. This is a mandate which is created by the statute. If I don't do that, there is a provision relating to penalty which can be imposed on Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan for not quoting the PAN. Now there is an additional condition also which is prescribed under section 139A6. It says the client who obtains the bill from Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan should verify as to whether the PAN provided by him is correct, PAN provided by the firm is correct. That flows from 139A6 and rule 144C. This is the scheme relating to obligation to disclose PAN. This is very important because today, when you are required to deduct tax at a higher rate, before going into that. So what is the consequence of not disclosing the PAN? Apart from being liable to penalty, 206AA section says that if PAN is not properly disclosed, tax has to be deducted at a higher rate. So people used to ask, how do I know that PAN disclosed is correct? If the customer discloses PAN of some other party, what should I do? Therefore, a statutory mechanism are put in place to say you have to disclose the PAN, the other party has to verify the PAN, and that a database was provided to verify as to whether the PAN provided by the person is correct or not. Now, in this background, today when there is an obligation to deduct tax at higher rate, and there is no obligation of the other party to disclose if he has filed his return or not, how will the assessee ensure that he has the payer who has to deduct tax ensure that tax has been he has deducting tax at the right rate? This is something which we will see in a few minutes, and the obligation to disclose and verify PAN has been explained in that background. Then comes the obligation to link or disclose Aadhaar to the income tax officers. We generally refer to colloquially as linking of Aadhaar with PAN. The correct legal terminology is intimating your Aadhaar number to the assessing officer. How do you do that? A scheme is framed. Section 139AA subsection 2 says every person who is eligible to obtain an Aadhaar, they don't use the word every person who has obtained the Aadhaar. He says every person who is eligible to obtain an Aadhaar shall mandatorily intimate his Aadhaar number to the income tax authorities. Now, who is the person who is eligible to obtain an Aadhaar under the Aadhaar Act? Every individual who is a resident of India is eligible to obtain an Aadhaar. You can choose not to obtain an Aadhaar. You can say that I don't want any of the benefits that the government extends to an Aadhaar holder. But that is not the only consequence. If you want to rebel against the government, there are other implications on the Income Tax Act that you have to fall under. Now, this section obligates every person to intimate his Aadhaar and to the income tax authorities. Indirectly says you necessarily have to obtain Aadhaar. Constitutional validity of this provision was challenged before the Supreme Court, and the challenge was rightly set aside by the Supreme Court. The proviso to the section 139AA2 says that if you fail to intimate the Aadhaar in the manner prescribed in the rules before 30/6/2021, which is 1 week from today, your PAN will become inoperative. It does not say your PAN will be cancelled. It says the PAN will be inoperative, and the rule also says if you intimate it in the future, the PAN will become operative from that future date. Another interesting aspect here is the PAN would become inoperative for the purpose of furnishing, intimating, or quoting the PAN under the IT Act only. The PAN becoming inoperative will not mean that it cannot be quoted for any other purpose. For example, under the Passport Act, there is a requirement for every person who is obtaining a passport to give his PAN. You can quote your PAN there. Or under the RBI regulation, if you have to, in relation to certain transactions, you have to disclose your PAN. Your PAN can be quoted for all those purposes. But wherever PAN is required to be quoted for the purpose of Income Tax Act, it will become inoperative from 1st of July if you don't link your PAN with Aadhaar. Then section 139A subsection 5 says PAN and Aadhaar can be interchangeably used. This was one of the major announcement in the Finance Act 2021. But the fine lines to it is the interchangeability is permissible only if you intimate your Aadhaar to the income tax authorities and not otherwise. Okay. Now, the consequences of non-filing of return. As we all know, section 139(1) says every person having its income which is above the slab rate has to file his return of income before the due date. Now, for a moment, let us ignore the other conditions for filing return. You have electricity bill above this much, you have telephone bill above this much, credit card above this much, let me know that. Section 206AB says that if a person has failed to file his return for 2 preceding years, and the amount of tax deducted and tax collected from his income during the both the years is more than 50,000 rupees, then tax shall be deducted or collected at a higher rate. These are twin conditions, that he should not have filed his return for 2 years and TDS is more than 50,000 rupees in both the years. Any one of the conditions is not fulfilled, the section will not apply as of today. In other words, if return is not filed for more than 2 years, but tax deducted is less than 50,000 rupees, the section will not apply, tax can be deducted at a lower rate. This monetary limit of 50,000 rupees is given to ensure that small assessees are not affected by the rigor of the section. The requirement to ensure that return is filed is not in respect, or it does not say that you have to file the return within the due date. You can file it belatedly also, but the return has to be filed under the provisions of section 139. The first question that arises in such situation is, what are the 2 years for which we have to see whether the return is filed? So let us see the answer to it in three situations, factual situation. Assuming the liability to deduct tax arises on 1st of October 2021, that is, the amount is credited in the books of the payee on 1st of October 2021, and the due date for filing the return for the financial year 2021, which is assessment year 21-22, is 30th of September, not extended. And the assessee did not file his return for the financial year 2021, nor has he filed his return for the immediately preceding year 1920. But he has filed his return for the financial year 18-19. In this situation, the due date for filing the return had expired 1 day before the credit was made into the account. So you have to see whether the assessee has filed his return for the immediately 2 preceding years, that is financial year 2021 and 1920. He has not filed his return for these 2 years, and therefore the higher rate of TDS would apply. The next example, the credit was made on 1st of October 2021. but the due date of filing the return is 15th October 2021. That is, the credit is made before the due date of filing return for the immediate preceding financial year has not expired, and as he has not filed his return also. The factual situation of filing returns for the other 2 financial year remains same. Here, given that the credit was made on a date before the due date of filing return has expired, and that the assessee has filed his return for one of the 2 immediately preceding years, the higher rate of TDS would not apply. Third situation is slight modification in the second situation. Though the due date for filing return has not expired, the assessee has actually filed the return. Even then, he will have to suffer higher rate of TDS because he has not deducted TDS. He has not filed his return for the immediately 2 preceding years. So now, what is the consequence of not filing the return for the 2 preceding years, or not having intimated the Aadhaar number to the income tax authorities? In relation to section 194Q, that is deduction of TDS on sale of goods, while the general rate of TDS is 0.1%, if he has not disclosed his PAN or not obtained his PAN, or if he has not intimated his Aadhaar number, TDS would be at a higher rate of 5%. Or if he is a non-filer, all the 3 consequences, instead of 0.1% TDS, the rate of TDS would go manifold, 50 times to 5%. All of you would agree, in trading of goods, no one has a profit margin of 5%. In manufacturing, there could be profit margin of 5%, but if it's a trader, seldom do you see that he has a profit margin of 5%. So if you are not filed your returns for more than 2 years, income tax department says all the profit should be paid to me as TDS. Similarly, in TCS, which is generally be 0.1%, if you have not obtained or disclosed your PAN number to the payer of income, or if you have not filed your, if you are not linked your Aadhaar, the TCS rate will go from 0.1% to 1%. And if you have not filed your return for 2 years, your TCS rate will go up to 5%. Now, what is the consequence of non-deduction of taxes or non-collection of taxes? We are all aware about it. I'm not going into in greater detail. Broadly, the tax which is not deducted can be recovered from the assessee along with interest, and there can be penalty which will be equal to the amount of TDS. There can be a penalty for non-payment of tax which is demanded. Apart from that, there can be prosecution for slightly I will want to elaborate on this. Section 276B says that prosecution shall be initiated for failure to deposit TDS. Prior to 1989, the law says that prosecution can be initiated for non-deduction of TDS also. And after 89, the law is amended to say it can be initiated only in relation to cases where TDS has not been deposited. Though courts have interpreted the provision to apply only where the section to apply only if tax is deducted and not deposited, there are some courts which have taken a view the section would apply even if tax is not deducted. Let us not go into the litigation and ensure that we comply with the TDS provisions. So similarly with TCS also, these are consequences of non-correction or non-deduction of TCS. Now, what is the interplay between the provisions of TDS and TCS? As we saw, the provisions relating to TDS and TCS both apply on sale of goods. In the same transaction, there is a possibility of application of TDS as well as TCS. In that scenario, how would we reconcile applicability of TDS and TCS? Let's take an example. The seller, which is S company, sells cotton worth 2 crore rupees to purchaser P company on 1st of July 2021. The seller at the time of raising the invoice would generally invoice 2 crores plus TCS on that, or including TCS of 0.1%. P company would record its purchase on the date on which it receives the invoice, that is assuming on the same date of 1st of July 2021. P company would say that on the date of credit, I will have to deduct TDS on the amount that exceeds 50 lakh rupees in the transaction. So if the invoice value is 2 crores, TDS at 0.1% is applicable only on the amount that exceeds 50 lakh rupees. So on the 1.5 crores, I will deduct TDS at 0.1% and will remit the money to the income tax department and will remit the balance to the seller on 30th of July 2021. Now, practically, yes company would not know till the time P company file its TDS return as to the amount deducted, the invoice raised by it. Does it represent TDS? Does it represent reimbursement of some damages? Does it represent the transportation cost? What does it represent? Even if tax is deducted, assuming, yes company would get, when tax is deducted, yes company will get notice of the tax deduction when TDS return is filed. On the money that it receives, it will also not know whether the purchaser P company has paid the component of TCS. So now S company is in a limbo. It doesn't know whether it has to remit out of its hands the TCS obligation under 206C1H, because the section would apply only if tax, section would apply only if tax is not deducted, and S company does not know whether tax is deducted or not. This situation we have to live with, and there is no legal solution to it. The only precaution that taxpayers can take in such scenario is that the commercial contract should specifically provide that in the event of S company being liable to TCS demand in the future on account of P company not deducting taxes, or after deducting, S company should be adequately compensated. Many a times question is asked, if S company takes a declaration from P company that it will deduct TDS, and then on the strength of that certificate does not collect TCS or does not deposit TDS, that will be sufficient? The answer is no. Though the declaration would be sufficient to protect you from penalty or prosecution, you will still have to suffer recovery of taxes and the interest thereon. The consequence will be significantly high if the TCS ought to have been done at 5% because of non-filing of return for the earlier 2 years. So we have to be very careful in this. The other question that generally many people ask is, as a matter of precaution, can yes company say, I don't know whether P will deduct TDS and pay or not. Therefore, you pay me TCS, I will have it with me. As soon as you give me TDS certificate, I will remit that TCS portion to you. A tricky question. Answer should be no, because once you collect anything by name of tax collection at source, you are collecting it on behalf of the government. You will have to deposit it with the government within 7 days from the end of the next month. Not doing so can lead to prosecution. Having said that, though it cannot be collected in the name of TCS, having trade deposits or intercompany deposits is not unknown in commercial transactions. So that can also be looked into if it's possible. Now let us see what is the interplay between one or more TDS provisions, because TDS under section 194Q on sale of goods will not apply if tax is deductible under any other provisions of the Act. Generally, we do not see TDS on sale of goods, but there are certain strange situations in which tax is deductible even on sale of goods. All this arose out of ingenuity of taxpayers only, I would say. Passing here for a minute. Section 194C, as introduced, provides for deduction of tax on any work that was carried on. As held by the Supreme Court in Associated Cements case, the word work is of very wide amplitude, but by no stretch of imagination can it include purchase and sale of goods. Work should always have a service element in it. So in the case of job workers, just to avoid TDS on the job work transaction, because when someone gives some goods for job work charges is generally paid. Job working is regarded as work. To avoid TDS on that, I don't know whether it is to ensure lesser compliance requirement or to ensure the transaction doesn't come within the tax net. Assessee is used to arrange the transaction, purchase and sale of goods. The principal manufacturer will sell the raw material to the job worker. Job worker will undertake the job and then resell the finished products to the principal manufacturer at the predetermined price. The margin between these two will be otherwise regarded as the job work charges. To plug this transaction, such type of arrangements, 194C was amended to say a job work transaction will be deemed to be work. That is, the job work transaction which is entered into in the form of purchase and sale of goods will be deemed to be work for the purpose of section 194C. Therefore, manufacturer, let us say, for example, is job working is, I understand, is in largely in place in automobile sector. Let us take, for example, Maruti wants to manufacture some car doors from a job worker. This is small work. Maruti would not want to put up a plant in its own factory. They engage the services of a job worker for that. But the quality of steel with the job worker will use should be under the control of Maruti. And therefore, what Maruti would do is purchase the steel from its reputed or trustworthy steel manufacturers, sell the steel to the job worker. Job worker will manufacture doors out of it and resell the manufactured doors to Maruti at a premium. On this transaction, assessee would not, neither would Maruti deduct TDS earlier, nor the job worker deduct TDS earlier. Then 194C was amended to say this transaction would be deemed to be work and tax has to be deducted on this. Tax has to be deducted on this, fine, but on what amount is left to the guess of taxpayers? Should Maruti deduct on the entire material cost or only the profit margin, or should the job worker deduct on the payment that it makes, is left to people to understand and interpret. Having said that, in this transaction where the transaction is subject to TDS and the provisions of this section, 194Q would not apply. Now, 194Q would not apply in which of the sales? Sale by the manufacturer, the sale of steel by Maruti to the job worker, or by the job worker to Maruti back. In my view, 194C considers both the transaction of sale and repurchase as one single transaction of work. Once one part of the transaction has been subject to TDS, according to me, both the transaction of sale of steel by Maruti to the job worker and the sale of manufactured door by the job worker to Maruti back should not be subject to TDS under 194Q. Now, the next issue that we often see is how to compute the monetary limit for applicability of the TDS provisions. We saw the transaction would apply if the value of the TDS would apply if the value of the transaction is in excess of 50 lakh rupees in a year. This TDS provision is being brought in from the middle of the year, 1st of July. So 3 months have already passed. How should we compute the monetary limit in such situation? Should we take the sales made prior to the section coming into effect, or would the 50 lakh limit start only for sales that are made after the section coming into effect? Is something which we have to see. We will see it in the next 5-10 minutes. Let us see this example. Certain purchases were made before 1st of July, that is the before section coming into operation. The total value of the purchases is 40 lakh rupees. And the payment for that is also made before 1st of July, the section coming into operation. After the section coming into operation, additional purchases of 20 lakh rupees is made, and additional payment of 20 lakh rupees also made for the purchases made post 1st of July. The section says TDS should be deducted on sales which aggregates 50 lakh rupees or more during a financial year. When it says during a financial year, it would include the sales that was made during that year, even before the section came into existence. Therefore, in scenario A, the aggregate sales made during that year is 60 lakh rupees. The threshold limit of non-deduction of TDS is 50 lakh rupees. Tax under section 194Q has to be deducted on 10 lakh rupees. The second scenario, purchases is made of 40 lakh rupees before the section came into operation. Money for that is not paid till the section comes into operation. After 1st of July, goods worth 20 lakh rupees is again purchased. And the entire payment for both the purchases is made after the section comes into operation. Here again, tax would have to be deducted only on 10 lakh rupees. Third scenario, this is somewhat important. Given certain clarification issued by CBDT in the context of TCS, I will explain it after this slide. Purchases were made after 1st of April 2021, but before 1st of July 2021. The goods were purchased, title in the goods transferred, record in the books of both the buyer and seller. But the money is not paid till the time the section comes into operation. Money is paid on 1st of July. Question arises whether tax is to be deducted on the payment. The answer is no, because the section on TDS requires tax to be deducted at the time of credit or at the time of payment, whichever is earlier. The credit happened before 1st of July. When the credit, at the time of credit, tax is not deductible, the section would not get triggered when payment is made. So when payment is made after 1st of July for purchases made before that date, TDS under section 194Q will not apply. The fourth scenario, advance payment is not unknown in commerce. A purchaser made payment in advance before 1st of July, but the goods were actually purchased only after the 1st of July. As we saw in the immediately preceding example, tax is to be deducted at the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier. Here, the payment was made earlier. At the time of payment, the provisions related to TDS were not applicable. Therefore, at the time of credit, the section would not apply, and therefore there is no obligation to deduct TDS. The fifth example, goods worth 90 lakh rupees was purchased before 1st of July and payment of 90 lakh rupees is made. Post 1st of July, goods worth 10 lakhs alone is purchased, but the aggregate purchases during the year is 1 crore. The amount of purchases which exceeds the threshold of 50 lakhs is another 50 lakhs. Question arises as to what is the amount on which tax is to be deducted. The answer is only on the amount of 10 lakhs, because TDS cannot apply on transactions that are concluded before the section came into place. Therefore, even if the threshold exceeds by the 50 lakh threshold was exceeded even before the section came into operation, the tax cannot be deducted or collected at source on transactions which are concluded before the section came into operation. So these are the 5 situations that I could imagine. I know it is very easy to put a table and say payment made, purchases made, all those things in a seminar. When you put pen to paper and implement it, you will find hundreds of problems. We can discuss and try to answer those problems as and when it arises. I broadly thought these are the basics that we have to understand before solving any problem that might arise. Now, 6 months back, when the TDS provisions came into operation, there were a lot of representation which was made by taxpayers because of ambiguity in the section. 2 days before the section came into operation, that is on 29th of September, the section was to come into operation 1st of October. On 29th of September, the CBDT came out with some clarifications. The clarification said that TCS would apply on any money that is received for sale of good after 1st of October 2020, even if, for example, the sales was made 4 or 5 years in advance. This is first clarification that they issued. According to me, that is incorrect. It also says that no TCS on sales received before 1st of October 2020 even if the goods were sold after 1st of October. This, according to me, is correct because the event of collection of tax at source is the date of receipt of money. On that date, TCS was not in operation. Therefore, TCS cannot be collected. Practical impossibility of performance will ensure the tax is not collected at source. And then the threshold limit of 50 lakhs is to be considered for all sales made from 1st of October. So this position is also correct. Now the clarification, all the three clarifications issued by CBDT in the circular, if a question is raised, would it apply to TDS also? The answer is no. The clarification issued for TCS, will not automatically apply to TCS for two different reasons. First, as we saw, TCS is to be collected at the time money is received for sale of goods. The event that triggers collection of TCS is receipt of money, whereas tax would have to be deducted, TDS would have to be deducted at the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier. The timing difference would ensure that the principles on which that circular has been issued by the CBDT on TCS would not apply to TDS provisions. Second, the clarification issued by the CBDT to say that on all money received post 1st of October, TCS would apply, even if the sales was made 3 or 4 years in advance, according to me, is contrary to the provisions of the Act. TCS is a tax to be collected on sale of goods. The event that triggers collection of tax is the sale, but the event of collection is receipt of money. These are two different events. If one of the events happens before the section comes into operation, the operational section would fail. Therefore, the provisions relating to the clarification issued by CBDT on TCS, according to me, is inaccurate, but no one would challenge it given that the amount of TCS is too small. So for this reason also, we should not blindly apply the circular issued by CBDT on TCS to TDS. Now, large number of questions that are being posed on the determination of threshold limit is on whether GST component should be included in computing the threshold limit of 50 lakh rupees or in determining the amount on which tax is to be deducted. Indirect tax collected, before that, the section says that TDS is to be deducted on the consideration for sale of goods. Therefore, the question that we have to ask ourselves is whether GST collected by the seller along with his invoice, is it the consideration for the sale of goods? The answer is yes. The Supreme Court has settled this provision 30 years back, and even in some cases before that also, in the case of Chowginchi Sales Bureau. In Calcutta, when there was an auction of some goods, and the auctioneer was obligated to collect sales tax along with the consideration for the auction price, question arose as to whether the income of the auction house included the auction price alone or the sales tax collected. The Supreme Court held the consideration for the sale would include not only the price that was declared in the auction, but include the sales tax collected also. On that principle, the consideration for sale of goods would include GST or any other reimbursement that is collected along with the price of the goods. This position has been clarified by the CBDT in its circular of 1990 in the context of excise duty collected on sale of liquor. As we all know, liquor, for whatever reason, has been kept outside the legislative competence of the center for the purpose of collection of taxes, and the state government collects tax on liquor. That's why it's called a state excise duty. When TCS was introduced on liquor licenses, question arose as to whether the TCS is to be collected on the auction price of the liquor license, or should it include excise duty component also, because excise duty on liquor is very high. The CBDT clarified that you will have to collect TCS on the value including excise duty. And according to me, that proposition of the CBDT is correct. Today, therefore, for computing the 50 lakh limit for determining whether TCS would apply, we will have to include the value of GST collected or customs duty collected, octroi collected, or transportation costs separately collected by the seller of the goods. Next, coming to the question as to what is the amount on which 0.1% TDS should apply. The answer is, according to me, the price for the goods, including the excise duty or GST, which is collected on the sale of goods. This is because TDS should apply on the consideration for sale of goods. Consideration for sale of goods would include the GST collected thereon. In the context of services, service tax, the CBDT initially issued a circular to say on service tax, you need not collect TCS or you need not deduct TDS. After service tax was presumed into GST, circular was modified to say that TDS need not be deducted on GST, on the service component of the GST. GST on services could be outside the provisions of TDS. Now, the circular will not extend ipso facto to GST on goods. So, when applying 0.1% TDS under 194Q, TDS has to be deducted on the consideration including GST for these reasons. Okay. Unless the CBDT issues a circular to exempt collection of TDS and on GST component as well. This is practical hardship that we have to face, cash flow problem, but there is no legal answer to it. Only the executive has to come up with circulars to exempt the taxpayers from such hardships. There are a few other issues. Just give me 1 minute, please. Few other issues that we have been asked repeatedly on this point is where the assessee has, say, branches across 10 states, and each of these 10 states have separate TAN number. In computing the TDS on purchase of goods, given that tax is to be deducted TAN number wise, tax return is being filed TAN number wise, should this 50 lakh limit be considered for each TAN, or should it be considered for each per assessee or per the supplier? Tax requirement under this section is on purchases made from a person, made by a person from a person. The all TAN numbers put together is a person, so it has to be seen TAN number wise and not TAN number wise. Can adjustments be made for purchase returns? Unfortunately, the section does not provide for any such adjustment. We will have to, after deduction of TDS, claim credit by the other party. Another question that's being repeatedly posted is whether TDS would apply on purchases from special economic zone or export-oriented units, because there's a general presumption, more so among customs lawyers or a purchase department or sales department, that an SEZ is an area which is outside India. So any purchase or sale from SEZ should be considered as import or export. That proposition is correct only for customs purposes or GST purposes. An SEZ location is very well within India. For example, tomorrow there is a robbery in the warehouse of the SEZ unit. Under which law would they file a complaint, or which police will they complain to? They cannot say that SEZ outside India and therefore IPC or CRPC will not apply to such transaction. SEZ is very well within India. For purpose of a statute, some special statutes, it is considered as a location which is outside India, and that presumption will apply only for that statute. For everything else, SEZ is well within India. So purchases and sales made to SEZ will also be subject to TDS and TCS. They will not be regarded as export of goods. Other big issue that we face is what is the meaning of goods. We saw the tax is to be deducted on sale of goods. There are various, the entire jurisprudence on commercial law started with goods only, Contract Act and goods. So there are many statutes that give meaning to the word goods. For example, Section 2(7) of the Sale of Goods Act defines goods to mean every kind of movable property and includes stocks and shares. Now, Section 252 of the GST Act says goods is any type of movable property, but excludes money and security and actionable claims. Money and securities is excluded. Security is excluded in the definition of goods under the GST Act. whereas securities or shares is included in the definition of goods in the Sale of Goods Act. And Article 366(12) of the Constitution of India also defines goods for the purpose of saying what would be the ambit of GST law. It also defined goods to include all material, commodities, or articles. There are many other statutes that define goods. For example, the Carriage of Goods Act for the purpose of levy of customs duty, or law relating to title of goods that are shipped, or we generally refer to as high sea sales. Then Export-Import Bank of India Act also defined goods as to how the bank can lend, what are the transactions and which money can be lent in foreign currency, how can money be realized, all for all those purposes. Then Bureau of Indian Standards Act also defines goods for the purpose to say that which of the goods that are sold in the market should have this ISI standard mark, and which of the goods should have some other standard marks. Now, all these definitions, there are 10 other statutes which define goods. Out of all this, how should we understand goods? The word goods is not defined in the Income Tax Act. In the absence of a definition, we should interpret the word to have the meaning that is generally understood by a common man. A common man understanding of the word goods should go by the definition given to the word in the law that relates to goods. For example, the Sale of Goods Act, which relates or says that when will a title in the goods pass, who will be the buyer, who will be the owner of the goods, who will be the seller of the goods, when has purchase, when has delivery, when should delivery be given when a good is purchased or sold. All these regulations which are common or generally required to understand a transaction in goods is contained in the Sale of Goods Act. Therefore, the definition of goods given in the Sale of Goods Act should be considered for the purpose of understanding the word in the perspective of Income Tax Act. The definition under GST law or given under the Bureau of Indian Standards Act cannot be taken because those are special act meant for special purposes. GST Act is meant for the purpose of collection of tax on sale of goods. It can have artificial meaning to the word goods. For example, even the Income Tax Act, we have meaning for the word transfer. Very wide, very wide. So if someone has to understand the meaning of the word transfer in its common law, cannot refer to the meaning in the Income Tax Act, because Income Tax Act is special legislation meant to collect tax on transfer, and it can therefore artificially define the word transfer in an exhaustive manner. GST has also, in such exhaustive manner, defined goods. Therefore, being an artificial legislation, the meaning given to the word goods in the GST Act cannot be taken into consideration for understanding the meaning in the Income Tax Act. Now, in relation to specific goods, whether shares in a company will be regarded as goods, the Bombay High Court in the old judgment of 1923 has held yes in the context of payment of stamp duty. Though today, by statutory exclusion, purchase and sale of stocks in stock market in an electronic platform is excluded from collection of TCS. We hope such similar clarification is issued for TDS also. But for that, sale and purchase of goods in stock exchange is subject to TDS under 194Q. Electricity is good as held by the Delhi High Court in the old judgment of NTPC. Electricity can be subject to VAT. These are goods because they are movable, they are tradable. Similar is so is water. So on purchase of electricity bills, we will have to deduct TDS under 194Q. Purchase of industrial water, there will be obligation to deduct tax under 194Q. It is different if the purchases are made from the state government electricity board, where there is a special exemption granted for non-deduction of TDS. There again, we have to examine whether the Maharashtra State Electricity Board is the state government itself, or is it a board which is different from the government. Those things will be have. Under the common law meaning of the word goods, immovable properties will be excluded. One of the primary and important criteria for the word goods is it should be movable. Immovable properties will not be regarded as goods. Similarly, as explained by an old judgment of the Supreme Court in BD Goyal, debentures are not goods. The reason given by the Supreme Court was debenture is nothing but an actionable claim. It is not. It does not have an underlying goods in it. It's like a bill of exchange. It is not goods per se. So statutory exemption is given for electricity and shares, which are traded on an electricity exchange or the stock exchange. That exemption is available today only for TCS. The CBDT will have to give some extent such exemption to TDS as well. On purchase and sale of goods, okay. We generally confuse the phrase contract for work and the work contract. We interchangeably use it. Section 194C is applicable on contract of work. A works contract, on the other hand, is one where the contract requires performance of service as well as sale of goods under the same contract, and both these are so intrinsically linked that they cannot be bifurcated amongst each other. Such contract are commercially referred to as works contract, legally also. Question arises as to whether on such works contract, which includes sale of goods as well as rendition of services, would TDS under 194Q or TCS under 206C1H apply? As we saw, the section would apply only on purchase or sale of goods. The issue arose in the context of VAT earlier, because VAT, as we all know, is a tax on purchase or sale of goods. The Supreme Court, in the case of Gann and Trankalli, in the Rajasthan VAT regulation, stated that if it's a works contract which has the component of both goods and services, it is not a transaction for sale of goods, and therefore VAT cannot apply. Under the same principle, on works contract, TDS or TCS would not apply. It can apply under other provisions. It will not apply under the provisions of 194Q or 206C1H. Another important question that we are faced with is what would happen in the case of purchase of software. Now, whether a software, its goods or services, will depend upon the contract. When we have to download a software, for example, even your ITR or Taxman, we don't realize that we are giving our consent to a huge terms of contract. Many a case I'm told that contract runs into 120 pages. We don't even spend 120 seconds, microseconds to say, I agree to the terms and conditions. Going forward, to determine whether the software that we are paying for is goods or services, we will have to look at the contract. What does it say? As we all know, the Supreme Court in the case of Tata Consultancy Services as a state of Andhra Pradesh stated that if a software is embedded in a CD, it will definitely be goods. That does not mean a software which is not embedded in the CD is not goods. We will have to see from contract as to whether it is a transaction, it's a transaction in which a service of software development is rendered or a software is sold in the form of goods. The Supreme Court recently, in the case of Engineering India Analysis Center, has stated that when a payment is made to a foreign company for license to use a software, the transaction cannot be regarded as a royalty, and therefore TDS cannot be deducted. So the question is asked as to whether the transaction of purchase of software licenses from an Indian supplier will not be subject to TDS because of the Supreme Court judgment. The prima facie answer is no, because the Supreme Court was concerned with the definition of royalty as used in the treaty with USA, Japan, and other countries. It was not concerned with the definition as it's there in section 916 explanation 2 to the Income Tax Act. It will have to be independently examined as to whether on transactions with Indian persons, TDS would be deductible or not under 194J. Having said that, the CBDT in its circular of 2012 stated where the software licenses has to go through distributor, sub-distributor, retailer, and every other person. It is sufficient if tax is deducted at the first instance. Subsequent parties need not deduct TDS under 194J. Now, in the context of software, if we take an example of a software developer who is located outside India, so for example, Microsoft sells copies of its Microsoft Office or license to a distributor in India, Ingram, for example, the distributor, when making payment for the license fee, because of the judgment of the Supreme Court, need not deduct TDS. When the distributor is selling it to a retailer, on that sale, TDS under 194J might apply. If TDS under 194J applies, TDS under 194Q should not apply. But if for any reason, the distributor wants to take protection under the CBDT circular and says that I will not deduct TDS because of the CBDT circular, automatically 194Q comes into operation, and the retailer would have to deduct TDS on the payment that he makes to the reseller. Similarly, when software is being purchased by end user, 194J or 194Q can apply depending upon the situation. We will here again have the problem as to whether TDS and TCS both would apply. How would the distributor or the end user confirm that one of the sections alone apply? The problem is common, whether it is software or any other goods. Few other issues. One other issue that was largely talked about is what would happen to high C sales. High C sales, as we generally understand, is a sale when title in the goods is transferred when the goods are in the high seas. They are not in territorial waters of any jurisdiction. Let us take, for example, a Spanish company manufactures steel and sells it to a buyer in India, ICO. And the goods are put on a ship and are set on sale from Spain. When the goods are in the high seas, ICO sells the goods to another Indian company, let us, for example, J. And J sells the goods to K. And I understand this is a common commercial transaction which happened, and each of these parties have a margin of 0.1%, 0.5%, etc. So the initial transaction of import of purchase of goods from Spain, ICO, when making remittances, will not deduct TDS under 195 because no part of the income accrues or arises in India to S. TCS also will not apply because S does not have a presence in India, as held by Justice Radhakrishnan in his judgment in Vodafone. The provisions of TDS and TCS are applicable only if a person has a presence in India and not otherwise. So S, when selling the good to ICO, need not deduct TDS, need not collect TCS. And ICO, when making payment to the Spanish company, need not deduct TDS under 195. Now, when ICO sells the goods which are on high sea, for example, somewhere around in the Indian Ocean, the goods are sold. The goods are not located in India, but sale transaction happens between two residents, ICO and JCO. Question is whether ICO will have to collect TCS on the transaction it enters into with JCO. According to me, TCS need not be collected on import of goods. Therefore, in this transaction, JCO is not importing the goods but is reselling the goods to someone else. Consequently, the provisions relating to TCS will apply in such transactions. And when JCO makes the payment to ICO for purchase of these goods, TDS would apply because TDS would apply on making payment made to any person resident of India. It does not talk about where the goods are located. Post 1st of July on this transaction, only TDS would apply because on a transaction where TDS apply, TCS will not apply. So between 1st of October till 30th June, this transaction between ICO and JCO will suffer TCS. Post 1st of July, the transaction will suffer only TDS, not TCS, unless JCO fails to deduct tax on the transaction. Then when JCO ultimately sells the goods to KCO and K company files its bill of lading and imports the goods, K company will have to deduct TDS on the transaction because it is making payment to a resident. JCO need not collect TCS even for transaction before 1st of July because this is import of goods in India and the TCS is not applicable on import of goods in India. This is the general overview of the provisions relating to TDS and TCS on sale or purchase of goods. Before I move into other parts, sir, do you want me to address any particular questions here? Hello. So we can take up any particular questions that the participants might have on TDS and TCS before we move on to TDS on e-commerce transaction or TDS on sale of.
At the end of your session.
Sorry, sir.
We'll take up questions at the end of your session.
Yes, sir. Next, let us see the provisions relating to TDS on e-commerce transactions. In the last 5 or 6 years, the Indian players, many Indian players developed various applications that can be used over mobile phones. For example, Zoom, the application that we use on our mobile, or the Zomato, which we use for ordering our foods, or Flipkart that we use for ordering our groceries. All these things were developed. With the development of these e-commerce portal, lots of people across the country were able to sell their goods. Because the goods were not subject to TDS, Income Tax Department did not have details of those people who sold their goods and earned income, and believed that there is some tax evasion which is happening on goods that are sold through e-commerce players. The tax evasion, if according to the Income Tax Department is happening in e-commerce players, equally applies if the goods are sold off market also. But given that e-commerce players are easy targets, Income Tax Department can collect the data, a special provision was introduced by the Finance Act 2020 to require the people who are operating this electronic application to deduct tax on the payment that they make to people who sell their goods on their platform. An e-commerce operator, we can refer to as ECO. E-commerce operator is the person who owns the application, will have to withhold tax on the amount that is payable to any resident e-commerce participant. E-commerce participant is a person who offers to sell his goods or render services on the e-commerce platform. Now, tax is to be deducted on transactions relating to sale of goods as well as provision of services, which is facilitated through the digital or electronic platform which is maintained by the e-commerce operator. The section is not to apply if the e-commerce participant is an individual or HUF and the amount of transaction is less than 5 lakh rupees per annum. The section requires deduction of TDS at 1% on the value of goods or services that is sold on the platform. This is broadly what the section says. Now, what is the meaning of e-commerce as defined in the section? It says supply of goods or services, including digital products over a digital or an electronic network. The electronic network can be anything, can be the internet portal. Banks which provide e-banking is also rendering e-commerce services. I understand that there are some aggregation apps, for example, Urban Clap. If an individual wants to file his return, an accountant enroll themselves as service providers in that portal, the end user can use that portal to contact the chartered accountant to have his return filed, to have his books audited, to have his books of accounts prepared. In this example, Urban Clap, which is operating or owning the digital platform, is referred to as the e-commerce operator. A person who owns, operates, or manages a digital or electronic facility or platform is the e-commerce operator. The performance of filing of return or maintaining of books of accounts can be done manually. You can contact the client, ask him to come to your office, understand the manner of doing the business, prepare the books of accounts manually. But given that the transaction was concluded. The contract for rendition of services was concluded through the electronic platform. This transaction would be regarded as e-commerce. E-commerce participant being the chartered accountant who offered his service through the electronic platform, when earning this income, will have to suffer TDS under this section when Urban Claps makes the payment. So when the client makes a payment to Urban Clap for filing a return, say 1,000 rupees, of that Urban Clap will deduct its service fees of 200 rupees and remits 800 rupees to the child accountant. On that 800 rupees, tax has to be deducted under this section by Urban Clap. The section was so simple, no problem with it. They never leave the section to be simple. There are some sections and subsections to it. If the client makes payment directly to the chartered accountant, does not route the payment through the e-commerce operator. Today we have cash on delivery systems. You make payment directly to the consumer. Section deems that payment by the consumer directly to the service provider as payment being made by the e-commerce operator, and tax will have to be deducted on that also. In other words, even if payment is not made by the e-commerce operator and is made by the customer directly, obligation has been cast on the e-commerce operator to deduct TDS. How would it practically happen? Very difficult to monitor. And that's why all these applications are now slowly going away or asking for payment in advance through the electronic platform. Second, the transaction respect of which tax has been deducted under section 194O shall not be liable to deduction under any other provision of this act. For example, when a client engages the chartered accountant through the electronic platform and remits a sum of, say, for example, 1 lakh rupees, he would ordinarily be liable to deduct TDS under 194J. This section says when the transaction is routed through the electronic platform, the TDS will not be under 194J at 10%. It will only be 1% under the provisions of 194O. The section also clarifies that it will apply only to the services or goods being provided, facilitated through that platform, and will not apply to advertisement. Like, for example, if we are using Flipkart application, we suddenly get a pop-up of apply for Citibank credit cards. And Citibank credit card will make a payment separately to Flipkart for advertising its product. On such transaction, the section would not apply. Okay. The TDS of 1% will be increased to 5% if PAN is not provided. The requirement to provide PAN for TDS at 1% is inbuilt in the section itself, in 194O itself. We need not go to 206AA or to section 206AB to ensure reduction of tax at a higher rate. This is broadly the provisions relating to reduction of TDS on e-commerce transaction. To see it in a perspective, before the section came into play, let's take an example of Dell, which manufactures sells its laptop through Flipkart, which is an e-commerce operator. See, the buyer will go to the application of Flipkart and buy the laptop. C will pay 1 lakh to Flipkart. Flipkart rate arrangement with Dell. It will have an arrangement for a service fee for hosting the 2,000 rupees is the hosting fee. After deducting this 2,000 rupees, Flipkart will pay 98,000 rupees to Dell without deducting any other TDS. On this 2,000 rupees, Dell will have to deduct TDS under 194J or 194H, depending upon the arrangement, whether it's an agency arrangement, whether it's an arrangement for provision of any other technical or manager consulting fees, or just an arrangement for sale of goods which will fall within the definition of work. This was the provision before the section came into operation. After the section came into operation 1st of October, the same transaction, when the buyer pays 1 lakh rupees for purchase of laptop to Flipkart, Flipkart will deduct 2,000 rupees, which is its service fee, and in addition, deduct 1% of 1 lakh rupees as TDS under 194O and remit only 97,000 rupees to Dell. and Dell need not deduct TDS on the 2,000 rupees that will have to pay to Flipkart. This is how the section is intended to be operated on a bird's eye view. Again, here we will have lots of practical difficulties when we put this section into operation in the case of our clients. We will have to face it as and when the problem arises. Okay. Then the next item that we will have to have today's agenda is on TDS partial withdrawal. Like I stated when the session started, TDS is no more a provision which is intended to apply for collection of tax in advance alone. TDS is today a provision intended to ensure there is no evasion of taxes. And classic example of that is section 194N, which came into operation, which was introduced by the Finance Act 2019, but was largely revamped by Finance Act 2020. Broadly, a bank or a post office is required to deduct TDS under this section if any person withdraws more than 1 crore rupees in cash from any account held by the assessee in that bank. And there is an obligation to deduct 2% on such sum, on the amount that exceeds 1 crore, where assessee withdraws 1 crore and 50 lakhs in cash. The section says on the 50 lakhs, deduct TDS at 2%. Why is there a requirement to deduct tax when there is a withdrawal? Income tax department is not saying that cash withdrawn will be income, but it says we will not be in a position to trace where you have put that cash to use. It is quite possible that you are earning income which is not accounted for by you by using the cash that you withdraw from the banking channel. Therefore, we want to examine that, and to ensure we don't miss out in examining the transaction, you deduct TDS and deposit. And the person withdrawer can file its return and claim credit for it. Now here again, there's an inbuilt provision in this section itself, 194N itself, which says, if the assessee has not filed its return for 2 of the preceding years, and this section has been in operation till 1st of October 2020. Assessee has not filed its return for 2 of the preceding years. The section says the threshold limit of 1 crore will be reduced to 20 lakh rupees. And on any amount that exceeds this 1 crore rupees, tax will have to be deducted at 2%. To the extent the amount does not exceed 1 crore. And where the amount exceeds 1 crore, instead of deducting TDS at 2%, you will have to deduct TDS at 5%. So, to enable operation of this provision, banks and post offices were provided the database of assessees who had not filed their return for more than 2 years in the past. Banks have been using this for the past 6 months or so. Now, 2 days back, I understand the access to this portal is being provided to all assessees, and we will have to use it, and the system in place. We need not be afraid that Income Tax Department does not have the system in place. It is very much in place. It is only a question of all the users or end users being able to put it to final use. There are some practical difficulties that banks face while putting this system, directing TDS under this section. An assessee can have more than one account in the same bank. It can be in various branches. In the same branch, he can have a savings account as well as a current account. Now, the question is whether the section would apply on all accounts aggregated together. If yes, it is to be aggregated at branch level or across India level. The answer would be it has to be aggregated at all India level. With the banks having a centralized system for banking, they are obligated to check as to what is the amount of cash withdrawn from all the accounts maintained by the assessee in with that bank and deduct TDS accordingly. Joint account is a very big problem. If A and his wife, Mrs. A, both jointly own an account and money is withdrawn, how should we deduct TDS? The principles of banking is one of the oldest and fascinating field of law. There are excellent commentaries on banking, one of them being Paget on banking. All these issues have been contemplated by them, not today, but 100 years back. A joint holder of accounts, the joint account holder should be seen from which perspective, from the perspective of whom was a question that Paget has looked into in 1930 and stated that a joint account holder will be, each of the joint account holder will be regarded as absolute owners of that account. So even if, for example, A withdraws 90 lakh rupees in cash and Mrs. A withdraws 15 lakh rupees in cash from a joint account held by them, TDS under this section would apply on this transaction. On whose account will they deduct TDS is a big problem. The problem is equally applicable when interest is credited into the joint account. A joint account holders are equal account holders or owners of the account. And in such scenario, it will be regarded as independent accounts held by each of these parties. That is all I had to discuss in today's session, sir. I'm open to any other questions that you might have.
Let me go through the chat box and ask you whatever questions
Yes, sir,
people
please.
have asked.
Yes, sir.
One question is, if an SSC has filed ITR for the first time for FY 1920 and in the FY 2021 he has earned professional fees, TDS deducted was more than 50,000, then will its TDS be deducted at higher rate of tax?
Sir, there is a requirement to see as to whether a tax return was filed for immediately preceding 2 years. We are in a situation where the assessee was not required to file a return at all because he did not have any taxable income. But how will, as a person who is a deductor or the person paying the money, know whether he had filed his return or not? So as a payer, all I would go and see is what does the portal of the income tax department say. If the portal of the income tax department says that he has not filed his return, I will close my eyes and will have to deduct TDS at higher rates. I should not be bothered about whether that person was liable to deduct, liable to file his return or not. This problem exists even today. The CBDT has to come up with some modifications in its portal to say that where an assessee was not required to file a return, the 2 years threshold will not apply. In the absence of such provision, we will have to deduct TDS considering that he has not filed his return as a defaulter.
Okay, thank you. Next question is turnover for FY 1920. Turnover was below 10 crore and turnover exceeded in December 20, that is FY 2021. Is TCS applicable and from which date?
The TCS is applicable from the 1st of April of any year if the turnover in the preceding year exceeds 10 crores. That's like we have for tax audit. If the business income exceeds 40 lakhs, then you will be subject to maintain books of accounts and tax on the subsequent year. TCS provision is also similar, sir.
Okay. Next question. Purchase before 1st July is 20 lakh. Purchase after 1st July was 10 lakh. So total purchase not exceeding 50 lakhs. But receipt before 1st July, 20 lakh and receipt after 1st July is 45 lakhs. Is TCS applicable?
Sir, the question is on TCS or TDS, sir?
Question is TCS.
TCS only, because the position might vary in each of these things. As we saw, tax is to be deducted at the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier. TCS is to be collected at the time of payment only. The CBDT in its circular of 29th September 2020 has clarified that tax is to be deducted on all considerations received post 1st of October, irrespective of the date on which the sale happened. Even if the sale had happened 4 or 5 years back, but you receive the money post 1st of October, CBDT says you will have to collect. According to me, the position is incorrect, but it will be very difficult, or considering the amount is small, no one is ready to challenge the circular.
Okay.
Let us follow the circular and presume that TCS would apply on money collected post 1st of October.
Sir, we'll take up 1 or 2 questions more. Whether TCS would be applicable in case of a bad debt written off in an earlier year, but subsequently recovered in current year.
Yes, sir. Even if we have written off the bad debts, when we receive it post 1st of October, the character of money received for sale of goods only, and call it as bad debts recovered. The correct character is consideration for sale of goods only. On that amount,
Okay.
as per the
Next
CBT
question
circular,
is,
you'll have to
interest is collected as a result of late payment. Will that constitute consideration for goods and TCS be made applicable?
Sir, if any of the contracts, commercial contracts, if it is not paid within 1 month, that interest will be charged. That component of interest is not from a financing transaction that the seller has with the customer.
Okay.
This is part of the consideration for sale of goods only. We often see that if you make upfront payment, price of the goods is 95, but if you make payment after 1 month, price of the goods is 100. That does not mean the difference of 5 rupees is interest for the lending of money of 100 rupees. The interest is part of sale of goods, but collected in some other nomenclature. It is still continues to be consideration for sale of goods only, sir.
Okay.
TCS would apply.
As a section 206 AB is also applicable to non-resident person?
Not applicable, sir. Not applicable to non-residents.
Whether purchase of fuel from BPCL, HPL
Yes.
will attract TDS?
Yes.
Okay. And what about senior and super senior citizens who are exempted from filing of income tax return if they do not have question is
If they have not filed.
what about senior and super who are exempted from filing of income tax return if they do not have income exceeding maximum amount exempt from tax, will there be higher rate of TDS even they have submitted form 15H or 15G?
As we saw, there are twin conditions which are prescribed for application of the section. First is non-filing of return. Second is TDS of more than 50,000 rupees. Both are to be simultaneously satisfied for the section to apply. If the senior citizen has filed given form 15G or 15H, the deductors would not have deducted TDS. Therefore, second condition would generally not be fulfilled. And therefore, the section should not apply. If, for example, the deducted TDS of more than 50,000 rupees without considering the 15G, then the non-resident is expected to have filed the return and claim the refund. Okay. If he does not file and gives up that 50,000 rupees, generally people don't do that. The section can apply, sir.
Okay. After insertion of section 194, should there be no TDS on the commission fee charged by food aggregators like Swiggy, Zomato? If total
should not be, sir. Should not be, because the section specifically says once a transaction is subject to TDS, then no payment under that transaction will be subject to TDS. Any other provisions of this act.
Sir, last question or better clarification. I will not take much of your time. Can you give some clarification on new utility released by the department to
Sir,
check
I
return file
absolutely
check?
have no idea. No idea, sir. Absolutely. No.
Okay. Anyway. Okay, sir. Thank you very much. You have lucidly explained everything to all the participants. On behalf of Thane branch and the entire managing committee, I am very hearty gratitude to today's speaker S. Sriram sir for sharing his knowledge with us in today's seminar. I am thankful to all the participants for attending this VCM. We have been fortunate to have the renowned faculty. I am very thankful to the entire participants as well as our sponsor Thane Janata Sahakari Bank of this meeting. It is not possible to thank everyone for such an appreciating involvement. My apology not naming anyone. I request you, all of you, to come back tomorrow same time. Zoom link will be shared by tomorrow afternoon. In case if you not received any Zoom link before 3 p.m, kindly revert us or kindly PM to me, Swapnil Kolte, so that we can arrange for Zoom link to be sent on your mail or WhatsApp link. What happens certain times, our mail may not get delivered to your inbox, may go to your spam. That's why I'm requesting, if you don't receive any email of giving you Zoom link of tomorrow's meeting before 3 p.m, then kindly send us a WhatsApp message or SMS. Some way you connect with us so that we can provide you Zoom link of the meeting so that you don't miss. Today I got 10-15 messages. It was after 5 or 5:30. Still we have provided the Zoom link, but it will be better if you can ask us to provide Zoom link in case if you don't receive your Zoom link before 3 p.m. Thank you, Sriram sir, once again. Thank you all participants. It's a nice session and it's a hot topic, and you have explained every facet of these TDS and TCS provision in nice way to all the participants. Thank you once again. By this, I am now declaring end of today's session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sriram sir, again.